Madison kind of had its own stamp as well. Like in LA, a lot of times it was like, California, the beach, the outdoor summer night type thing. I feel like Madison for sure overall as a whole was very much like a outdoorsy fitness kind of USC, like ride your bikes around downtown kind of thing. And I'm curious, and you'd probably know better, like just initial like impact. What do you think might be maybe the twist or the stamp that Fort Worth might put on besides like what we view as like Texas,
Yeah, I think, the cool thing about Fort Worth is you definitely get more of that country flavor. Like whatever stereotype you may have about Texas, like, hey, I drove in a car and then all of a sudden it turned into a horse. Like what happened? Like, and the endearing part of Fort Worth is you do get that Texas flavor, that Texas vibe, that I don't know, that yes sir, no ma'am, howdies, like those are all real things, as cliche as they may sound, and you're going to get a lot of that. I hope you get a lot of that hospitality that the Texas culture does have here, especially in Fort Worth. But look, food here is great. The Tex-Mex, the barbecue. Right, everything across the sun there. I know Madison had great food. Ours is a different kind of fattening. We really we really lean into the fried side of things in Texas. But the cool thing too in August is that it's a really, I would say, a dead time for sports in a sense, and DFW being a major sports town, you've got the Dallas Cowboys, the Texas Rangers. Those facilities are but 10 to 15 minutes away from Fort Worth when it comes to that. So, you can go
Tommy's going to go for 2 weeks.
Too bad the Cowboys train in Oxnard, California.
No, the irony is that the Cowboys will be in camp, pretty much be in camp then, and they're coming to California, and I'll be coming to Texas. So.
Plenty of merch available. All right, well, thanks for... Go ahead. Sorry, Lauren.
No, Chase, I'm curious, if you do commute and stay at home, will you potentially be delayed from the broadcast because of a cow crossing traffic?
I think where it is, I will not, I won't have to deal with that specifically, unless you're coming through downtown itself. Yeah.
Well, I forgot to mention, Chase, I'm sure all you'll know, is the co-host of the Get With The Programming podcast, sister podcast, great podcast. If you guys haven't checked them out, please do. And also host the CrossFit Games podcast too. So thank you for being here. And just the best color commentator, a play-by-play guy could ask for.
Oh, easy.
Yeah, so
too many compliments.
Oh, yeah.
Let's get to what we were going to have him on to talk about, because Chase and I have kicked around these ideas before. We did a whole show a couple years back about this, about how we could redesign the season. And I got thinking, after talking to Brent, and Tommy's made some points too that have swayed my opinion on this a little bit, is that the sport is now at a point where I think we have more or less found the heavy hitters, and there's a little bit of attrition there, but the semifinals and games athletes, that's a pool that doesn't change a whole lot year to year. So does that mean that we don't, I used to be a big stickler and say, no, everyone's got to go through the open, everyone's got to take the same test, and now I'm not sure that's the case. And so I after talking to Brent Fikowski and hearing some of the ideas he has, and I know he's putting together a season proposal with the PFA, and I think we were going to compare notes at some point with him. But if we had a perfect world, and the only rules I'm going to lay out here is got to keep the open, got to keep the games, obviously. If you want to move things during the year, that's fine too. And we have to keep some sort of ranking or / point system for athletes. Other than that, what would the ideal season look like? I think there were a lot of improvements this last season, but if I was, and we talked about this on Death by, if I was going to talk about the win, it's the standardized programming. I love that. Mm-hmm. But I think we need to get away from virtual competition.
Yes.
And so
there's a fine line, because you can't, just the way the size of this whole system is always going to be a part of it. I also think that's the online portion, whether it's been the Open, the quarterfinals, or just qualifiers for some of the major events that we have in the space in the off season, that's a huge revenue-making avenue for the games and for these events. And to get rid of those or get away from those too much, I think unless there's another venue or avenue that makes as much money as those can, I would be a little concerned about getting away with it. But online open, online quarterfinals, online semifinals for the majority of the people that are signing up from the beginning, I think it's a lot with all the other qualifiers for the Wadapaloozas, the Rogues. Rogue is they have a qualifier for that. Dubai is a invite only in Madrid, down under. Like there's all these around the world Okay, that's a lot of qualifiers, especially if you're going to start incorporating maybe some of these events within your season structure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So here's what I want to do. Let's start with the Open. I think the season should actually never really stop. And what I mean by that is that, so after the games, I think we need to find a way to now start incorporating the off-season events into the worldwide ranking system. And then I think at the end of the year, once the Open rolls around, I think the top 20 athletes in the worldwide ranking system should get a bye into the quarterfinals. You can still do the Open to help your worldwide rank accumulate points, but you don't have to. You're automatically slated into the quarterfinals. That would encourage people, I think, to take part in some of these off-season events, earn points to try to get into that top 20 for the beginning of the year, and it keeps, I think, a contiguous story throughout the off season that you can kind of follow. So that's my first idea. What do we think of that?
Well, that touches a little bit on what Brent was saying, how you could almost tier events, right? Mm-hmm. And they're worth, I think it's ATP and golf do something similar where hey, this event provides a maximum of this amount of point value towards the system based on, perennially what it brings to the table. Obviously Rogue is a significant, lift for a lot of these athletes because the best in the sport go there. Madrid is a very highly potent event for Europe specifically, but you only get a handful of people from North America. Obviously Down Under is more regionalized as well. So I think if you could find a clean way to organize those accordingly, while still encouraging ways for the athletes to travel, because again, one of the big things that Brent said, which I think is a very valuable thing for the international growth of the sport and for the athlete brands too, if we really want to support that, is having them being able to be exposed to different locations geographically that they otherwise wouldn't get to interact and have fans see that. I mean, up until what was it? Strength and Depth in 2020 had Matt Fraser competed really in Europe. He had gone to Dubai, or had we seen Tier in Europe? The biggest athlete in the sport has not gone to one of the bigger markets. I got to witness that firsthand when we were down in Brazil, and even someone like Sean Sweeney. He's not a top 10 athlete, but he's very charismatic. And he went down there, and by the end of the Brazil CrossFit Championship that year, he had the entire crowd eating out of his hand. Now, granted, he was handing out 8x10 signed glossies to everyone. I'm pretty sure they were posted up in the bathroom stalls by the end of it. But it just that kind of stuff, I think, kind of builds the CrossFit spirit and keeps people engaged. If we really want to tap into a global audience.
What if there's no off season?
Well, and that's kind of what I'm saying.
And what I mean by that, what if we move the Open to mid-September, and that is the start in the sense that everybody has to do the Open, but from there we then get into the off season, and the off season competitions play a part, kind of like sanctionals, I think that sanctionals, thank you, to get you to semifinals. So we extend the off season. We spread out some of these majors through, early April, maybe even late March. And that's how we get more in-person competition.
That's an interesting idea, actually. So you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying let's incorporate what already exists in the off-season events like Rogue, Dubai, Wadapalooza, Madrid.
Yeah, and then we have Madrid, and now we have FitFest, and we have all of these big off-season events that you see a lot of high-level athletes participating in, and then they kind of have to pick and choose. It's so condensed, but then after Christmas, you have Wadapalooza, but you don't really have anything else until semifinals. So why don't we find ways to extend some of these off-season competitions that are now technically in season, but it gives athletes more opportunities to have these matchups that we were just talking about on Death By. We really want to see like Laura and Tia go head to head, but I don't only want to see them once or twice throughout the year. I want to see that happening multiple times. So how can we extend that, but giving athletes enough time to prep before they compete? And of course, working on their weaknesses for the games.
The biggest obstacle I see to that is making sure that both programming and qualification meets some sort of standard to where like there's a reasonable shot for a lot of people. Like I think a ton of athletes would love to go to Dubai, but it's invite only, right? So how is that going to play in? And then how are you going to gauge, what's more valuable programming to the season as a whole and the ranking versus going somewhere else. Now that's all stuff that can be worked out, but it's going to require a lot of organizational chutzpah to actually get it done. And is the first year in a new location, maybe even second year in the location, is CrossFit going to be equipped to do that? Or they're going to be like one of the most difficult things, even when CrossFit was at full strength with employees, staff, media, everything. One of the most difficult years was 2017 in trying to go to a new location because there's so many unforeseen details that you end up ironing out on site that cost money, that cost time, that cost manpower.
I've got like my structure in mind. You want me to just throw this kind of what I would do?
Let's hear
All right, so here's what I would do. I'd leave more or less.
Terrible.
I'd leave more or less the calendar the same, right? Yeah. I'd take the open and I'd make the open back to 5 weeks. Okay, but here's what we're gonna do.
Chase, you're pro.
I miss the 5 week open. I kind of miss it.
I do too.
Because I felt like it gave me.
I wrote down a whole thing. Dude.
Okay, so we're gonna make the open.
I love it.
The first thing, open 5 weeks.
We're gonna make the open great again. So we're gonna make it 5 weeks.
I like it.
All right. After 3 weeks, we're gonna move on. The top 10% are gonna move on. So I'm gonna essentially take the online quarterfinals and smash them into the final 2 weeks of the open. All right.
Okay.
So after week 3, because now you got a 5 week open, but now the affiliates who are like, hey man, that's a ton for us to run, and I get that. For the most part, after 3 weeks, most affiliates are going to see that load lighten significantly. Now you advance the top 10%. Now the final 2 weeks, that's when things get like this is where it's really on the line, and you can do you can do multiple tests. You can have back to backs. You can maybe do two open tests or back to back, whatever it is, and you can have you still have or you can put out two tests and be like, you got to do this one and then you got to do this one. You got to submit it. So that I think opens the door a little bit. Then you get through that final week. You're going to take we have 7 regions now because we have 7 semifinals. Am I right on that?
Yep.
You're going to keep those the same. You'll take the top. I want to say you'll take the top 120 from Europe and the United States, and then you're going to keep everything the same for everyone else that you go. And I'm going to just talk individuals. You're going to keep everything else for South America, Africa, Asia, and Oceania. They'll have the same amount of qualifying spots, all right? And that group of athletes will then move on to one of 2 in-person quarterfinal events that are put on by whoever, right? This is where the sanctional model comes back in, and they might. So for CrossFit to maybe make money, maybe those events have to pay a licensing fee to get the competition, but in return, they get all revenue from advertising, whatever stream they have. So they own that, but CrossFit gets some sort of fee. So then you run the quarterfinals in-person events. The top, it'd be, so in North America, it would be like the top 30 from each quarterfinal event go to the semifinal event that's now run by CrossFit. So you'd have 2 semifinal events in the United States. You'd have 2 in Europe, right? Or 1 in Europe. Did they have 1 in Europe? They had 1 in Europe.
They had 1, but yeah. I'd like to see 2 in Europe.
Yeah, so you'd have 2 in Europe, whatever. I mean, I think they deserve 2. But then you'd have live events that feed into the semifinals, right? Now the athletes that were given the bye, they're automatically slated into the quarterfinals. So you might not have that many spots available because if you have 10 from Europe, well, there's 10 fewer spots that are available for quarterfinals out of the open. I know it's a little convoluted, but then we're really running the season as we would, and then we qualify people out of semifinals at the games. After the games, you have your worldwide rankings, and now in the off season, you have a chance to accumulate points. And now this is the cool thing we're going to do. After in December, which is kind of the official quote unquote without having run Wadapalooza, but was sort of the quote unquote end of the off season.